The heater's going now, though. We're live. It is 8:34 here. Everything's going well. I was just checking some stock stuff, you know, because when you get hot and talks, people listen or something. Today we're going to talk about a Dodge 360 motor, because the photo that I have, the thumbnail that I have up, we want to talk about quadrajets a little bit. But this particular test was one that I ran way back on my van motor, mid-70s, 360 tradesman van. Looked like it was maybe originally an ice cream truck van. They actually used it for a glass company, used it, so they had big racks on the side of it and stuff. But I ended up running that motor on the chassis dyno, and then we took it out and ran it on the engine dyno. So we did a bunch of testing with that. But and then we did a lot of stuff to it with the. I didn't do anything to the short block, but we tried two different cams on it. We tried a 252 and a 268. We tried stock heads and then mildly ported stock heads, and then some Edelbrock heads, some mass cast Edelbrock heads. We tried the original 4-barrel intake manifold. I think we might have tried a 2-barrel intake manifold. And we tried the Edelbrock RPM air gap on it. We tried different rockers on it. We tried headers, because we also ran it with a stock exhaust. We tried the factory air cleaner, and you know, we tried a bunch of things. I even tried running it without the mufflers on it, because when we ran the stock exhaust, we ran the stock exhaust the way that it was in the van. Basically, we ran the stock cast iron exhaust manifolds with the pipes that come down, and the van exhaust actually fit on the dyno, so it worked out pretty well. So we were able to do a lot of testing with it, and I was surprised. It basically took kind of everything to get this thing to make power. So we started out at a whopping 224 horsepower and 338 foot-pounds of torque. So let's see. Dodge 360 van motor, all stock baseline. So that was bone stock. So not very stellar. But then we also put on the, I think we ran that, I'm thinking we ran that with a, yeah, we did run that with a 2-barrel intake manifold and carburetor on it. And then we stepped up to a 4-barrel quadrajet. It was a factory 4-barrel cast iron manifold, and then a quadrajet on it. And then we also ran headers on it and stuff. But we had to throw kind of everything at it to get it to make power. And eventually we ended up making 387 horsepower and 438 foot-pounds of torque. So it did good. It did really good on the torque production. 360, you know, it's 10 better than a Chevy 350. So obviously right away it has to be better. The interesting thing on this test was, one, we want to talk about the carburetor deal, but also the cylinder heads. We ran just mildly ported stock heads, you know, just pocket porting, just doing a little bit of bulwark and stuff. And maybe they did port matching and stuff, you know, because port matching is all the rage. But we ran those heads and we put Edelbrocks on it, and the Edelbrocks did nothing in terms of power compared to those heads. I didn't do a direct back-to-back test between the stock head and the ported head with the same cam in it, because when we made the change, because we had limited amount of dyno time, when we took the stock cam out, we took the stock cam out and the stock heads off, and then put these mildly ported heads on, and put the small little 252 extreme energy cam in it. And that helped, obviously it helped quite a bit. But I didn't do that's when we did that. That's when we changed over to the Edelbrock heads also. And the Edelbrock heads didn't really offer anything over those mildly ported stock heads. And this is something that the average guy could do, because they weren't professionally done. So the Edelbrock heads are aluminum, so that would be much better. So they would be lighter, but they weren't a big step up from the factory head. But the thing I want to talk about today is the test that I did with quadrajet, because I don't think the quadrajet is actually given as much love as it should get, because it's a really good carburetor, and it's really good for drivability and really good for flipping the air cleaner lid over, which I have to do. We have to run something on it so that I can get the video of the video and the sound bite of the what the Quadrajet VTEC sound. So that works really well. But it's good. Small primaries, big secondaries. You know, get a big kick in the pants. It's got a second set of air doors that enhance airspeed, if you will, and are open in relation to airflow. So it is a fairly good metering device. The circuitry in them is pretty good. They're actually fairly easy to tune. The bad thing is that you just have to take the lid off sometimes to get to some of the other things, to change jets and stuff. But metering rods and stuff usually go a long way, and those are pretty easy to take out as long as you have a selection of them, and then you can adjust it. And obviously having an airfill meter and all that's a good idea. You can get the bigger, I think that they have two common versions of the Quadrajet. The one that we did when I was out with Courtney and Scott out there at the CADCO, when they used the Cadillac version, which I think was an 800 CFM version. And it also had the little diaphragm that I showed that changed metering relative to elevation, which I thought was really cool. I didn't know that about the Quadrajet when Courtney showed me that. I thought, oh, dude, that's really cool. The Cadillac guys get, you know, a little bit extra put into theirs. The design team, you know, trying to make the Cadillac a little better. So that particular carburetor got that, which I thought was very cool. So if you're wanting to make lots of power, obviously the bigger carburetor would be the way to go. A 750 is kind of a universal small block size carburetor. It also works for big blocks up to a given power level. The 800 would be bigger. Obviously, if you're making lots and lots of power, the Quadrajet's not going to be big enough. It's not going to satisfy what a 950 HP or the new Edelbrock carburetor, which I highly recommend, or a Dominator or anything like that. But you could run two Quadrajets on it if you had a tunnel ram, that actually would work. So they work really well for what most of us would be using on the street. And the thing is, you can still find Quadrajets in the wrecking yard, and you can still find running ones that work fairly well. And so that's a good option. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is that we ran that Quadrajet, but we ran it on the factory manifold, which worked fine. But we also ran it on the RPM air gap, and on the RPM air gap, it was set up. It had the carburetor mounting flange was designed to accept a 4150, so we had to run an adapter, which is fairly common. We did this out with Courtney on the Cadillac stuff too. On some of the manifolds, we had to run adapters on them because we wanted to test the different carburetors, because everybody wants to know. But you know, what's better, a Holley or a Quadrajet? and depending on what carburetor the person has that's talking to you, that's going to be the best one, because whatever they have obviously is the best one. But the problem with trying to test it is with the intake manifolds, is particularly with a Quadrajet. If you're trying to compare a Quadrajet and a Holley, the intake manifold is never going to be the same for both of those carburetors, because they would require different intake. It would require different openings. So if you have the big primary or secondary opening designed to fit a Quadrajet, it's bigger than needs to be for the Holley, and so sealing can sometimes be an issue. Now they've had these adapters to go from a 4150 to a Quadrajet, and you can reverse it around to make it work. And so you can use that to put one on the other. The problem with that is that it also is a carb spacer. So the photo that I'm showing in the thumbnail, that shows you exactly what we were talking about the other day when I was talking about putting the nitrous plate on a dual plane carbureted intake manifold with a divider that comes all the way up to the carb flange. This is a perfect example of that. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at my photo just to make sure that, yeah, so it's a perfect example. This one has the 4150 flange on it, and then we have the Quadrajet flange on the adapter, so that we can put the Quadrajet right onto this manifold. The problem being is, you know, we have the opening the big opening for like the secondaries on the quadrajet, because obviously the outside of that bore is bigger than the outside of the Holley bore. Now that has to taper down in and go to the openings that are designed for a 4150. So you have that, which is obviously not ideal. But the big thing that changes this is, I think that that's enough of a change to say, hey, look, this is a change in the manifold essentially, and we are not allowing the airflow and for the carburetor signal to be accurate the way that it would be if you just put that carburetor on a manifold designed for the quadrajet. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if we run this spacer, it's going to act as an open spacer, and it's going to change the design of the intake manifold. This is no longer a true divided manifold that it would be. It would go all the way up to the carburetor, and the carburetor would have, you know, 2 of the holes would feed one side and 2 of the holes would feed the other side, and the signal would be halved to each side. And actually the signal that's generated is much better that way. So the carburetor is more effective. But so if you cut a divider in it, you change that. If you put a spacer on it, like is on there now, like if you look at the thumbnail, it changes the signaling to the carburetor, especially down low. So we talked about that with the nitrous plate. Nitrous plate, a big open, an open spacer essentially, does the same thing. Now, we weren't talking about going from one carburetor to the other, but the effect is the same. It changes the signal down low, and usually that requires different jetting. I mean, it could be lean enough to where it going to a spacer like this can make the thing misfire when you're trying to snap the throttle open. Obviously not good. And you might think, oh, it's, you know, our first reaction is spacers are junk, or this carburetor is junk, or whatever, because we're angry because it's not working the way that we want it to work. But the reality is that we've made a change by putting this on there, and now we have to basically readjust it so that the carburetor will now work with this adapter. And now that we've done that, we've changed what should be happening with this carburetor if we wanted to do a direct back-to-back test with it. The problem after that, if you're thinking, well, Richard, you should just do it with the right intake manifold. Yes. But now we're not just changing the carburetor. Now we're changing the carburetor and the intake manifold in trying to do a comparison with just a carburetor. And that, my friends, are some of the problems that are associated with trying to do this direct back-to-back test, especially if we're constantly saying, look, you have to change one thing at a time. You can only change one variable. If we want to find out what that variable does, that can be the only change because we want to see what happens. But the problem is, like we've seen here, sometimes you just can't change only one variable. Sometimes it requires more things, as we've seen when we're modifying vehicles, because when you modify something, when you change one thing, now all of a sudden you have to change 3 or 4 other things to make it work. It's like, I'm going to put a carburetor on. Oh, well, great. Now I have to change the linkage. Okay, now I have to change the return spring. Now I have to change the trans kick down. And again, it's just a never-ending spiral. Now this thing is in the way. I've got to move the coil over, and you guys know what it's like. You know what it's like to modify cars, and it it can snowball on you, and but that's all part of the fun. You know, there's just the thing is, there when you're modifying stuff, there's just another hurdle in front of you. Okay, I got to go over that hurdle. There's just another one, and there's another. Some of them are big. Some of them are high hurdles. Some of them are low hurdles. You just step right over the high hurdles. They trip you up and you fall, but you get back up and you go to the next hurdle and fix all of that. And that's what modifying stuff is. And so you have to have, when you're doing this, you have to have a fair bit of tenacity to make all this work. Because like I said, if you take a simple carburetor swap, I'm going to get rid of the quadrajet and put a Holley on, or I'm going to get rid of the Holley and put a quadrajet on, or I'm going to get rid of a carburetor that's bad that needs to be rebuilt and put a new one on. Well, this new one's junk. It didn't just work. I didn't just put it on. I bought a brand new carburetor. It should work right out of the box. For us, a lot of times they do. We take carburetors and put them on. In fact, we go get the carburetor from the carburetor cabinet, and it just came off a small block. We put it on a big block. It just came off a Chevy. We put it on a Dodge. It just came off a Ford. We put it on a Chevy, whatever. And it just works. And it's always close enough to where even if we had to do a little bit of jetting, and I don't normally worry about doing everything because I'm doing wide open throttle anyway, so it's not a big deal. But if you're doing dyno testing with Brule, he goes in and makes sure that the thing idles right, and that the transition circuitry from the idle to going to throttle, and he makes sure that it's all right. Because a lot of times the motors that he's working on are going in boats or cars or whatever, and so they want that to be right. For me, running wide open throttle, what I care about is running from 2500 to 6500 or whatever. As long as the wide open throttle stuff is working, I'm okay with that. I like the thing to idle, but getting a carburetor idle is really fairly simple. So go in, adjust mixture screws, set the idle screw, and it's usually fine. So that's pretty simple. But I don't spend a whole bunch of time tuning it on the engine dyno, because usually what I'm going to do is take that carburetor off and put another one on there, or change the intake manifold, to change carb spacers or whatever. And so it's, it would take forever just to make that thing perfect for each one of them. We can make the wide open throttle air fuel curve be what we want it to be within reason on these carbureted applications. Sometimes it wants to be, rich here and then lean here, and we try to get an average there, and it's a little more difficult. But when we're testing these things, like it's particularly this adapter that we're talking about, and I think that that's one of the problems that we had with doing that test, running the Quadrajet on there. We did run the Quadrajet. It didn't work as well as I thought it should, and it was lean, and we didn't have a bunch of stuff to change to fix that at the time. So it was lean initially, and then it would get better, which is what will happen, and then it gets richer as RPM goes up, because now the signal is better. But we ended up just putting a Demon carburetor on there. And when we put the Demon on there, because it's a 4150 style carburetor, and the manifold the Edelbrock manifold was designed for 4150, and then obviously it worked fine. And so the takeaway from that for a lot of people would be, oh yeah, those Quadrajets are junk. Well, no, it's because of the adapter. It's because of a problem that we've created. That doesn't make the carburetor not bad. In fact, that Quadrajet, came from Sean Murphy Inductions SMI. He does really good stuff. Knows, obviously, he's forgotten more about Quadrajets obviously than I'll ever know, and so he's really good at it. And this one worked great. And he also did a 2-barrel for us, a 2G, and that worked perfect too. So obviously he knows what he's doing. And so there's nothing wrong with the carburetor. There's nothing wrong with the carburetor the problem that we didn't create. So we'll see what you guys got going on this morning. Hopefully everyone's doing well. Got to get our poll up. Just checking spelling on something. Okay, have you ever run a Quadrajet and flipped the air cleaner lid to hear the glorious sound? It's very cold here this morning. Lots of stuff is frozen outside. In fact, our fountain, the top two, because they have less water in them, the top 2 layers of the ponds that are created by the fountain is like a 3-tiered pond setup. And so the top 2 actually had ice in them this morning. Not that I'm in California and I'm complaining, because it's, it's sweater weather. I know people back in Michigan and stuff, they know what cold is. What a letdown on the heads. Yeah, I was hoping, because normally when we put aluminum heads on something, even Edelbrock heads from back in the day. And I have to say that for a long time, we always thought as Edelbrock heads as kind of a middle of the road cylinder head upgrade for a lot of stuff. But then the Edelbrock heads got really good. Their big block heads are really good. Their small block heads got to be really good. And they really put an effort into making them like fairly performance oriented. These Dodge heads just didn't. And I talked to Dulcich about it, and he said the same thing. He said, yeah, with some work, they actually can work fairly well. He said, but it takes a fair bit of work to get them to make them, flow well. And he's actually pretty good at that. They don't exist here anymore. What's that? The Edelbrock heads? The best carb is the one that's on the engine and running well. I agree. And then when you do get it running right, just leave it alone. just drive it around. First two S10 builds 30 years ago ran quadrujets good. Through a 5 and second on a 350, run on the Performer RPM manifolds, and the drivability and fuel mileage from the spread board was amazing. They are good. I had a quadrujet on my Camaro. Before I put a Holley on it, but I put a 450 Economaster on it. I take that back. I did not have a Q-Jet. My motor was, the one in my Camaro was a base 2-barrel motor. So my Rally Sport came with a base 2-barrel. And then I actually traded. I had a friend of mine, Mike. I think Mike ended up being the valedictorian of the school, of our high school. Super sharp guy. But he had a Camaro with a 307 in it, and he wanted to trade me my 2-barrel setup for his 4-barrel setup. So we swapped, just did an intake swap and put those on. And then once we got it running right, obviously I had a 4-barrel. But I was thinking I came with a quadrujet, but it didn't. It was a lowly, like a 270 horsepower, 250 horsepower base 350 in my Camaro. So let's see, 1970. Camaro. The Rally Sport. Dual front bumper. Engine specs. So available in 1970, there was a 250 inline 6-cylinder, a 307, 350 in the Z28, an L48, an L65, an L78, and an L30. Oh, an L34. So mine was an L65, 250 horse, 2-barrel, 350. Man, that would have been cooler, much cooler to have the L48. So mine was probably had a wimpier, the L65 probably had a wimpier cam in it. It probably did not share the L48 camshaft, and it definitely did not share the induction system. It probably had the same heads. Muscle car facts. Good stuff. Oh, is the photo upside down? That happens. I need to send it to myself and then send it back, so we'll fix that at the end. That's for all my all the boys down under. Have you ever run a quadrujet and flipped the air cleaner lid? 77% are saying yes. The rest of you that have not done that, you need to do that. Not knowing any better, I also ran a spread bore to square bore spacer to mount my first Q-Jet on my first Performer RPM. It works, and what happens oftentimes is it does make more power on the top. It's just that it kind of messes up the signal on the lower, on the small end, not the big end. Just use divided adapters. That's possible, but there wasn't a specific quadrujet to 4150 divided adapter. Travis, Richard, everyone, when choosing a new carb, do you prefer an Edelbrock or Holley for the win, and why? Right now, if you're picking a performance carburetor, and not, I would pick the new Edelbrock, not the one that looks like a Carter or a Q-Jet. I would pick the new Edelbrock. It has way more adjustability, and you'll be able to like dial that thing in. And they make more power. I'm scrolling back to make sure I didn't miss anything. Car peeps. Change one thing, gotta change everything else. That's really the way that it is. Ride a Q-Jet on my Buick. Yep. JPL, what's up? Tom, why do valves have to be circular? Well, one thing is because the valves rotate. I put a Holley 2-barrel on a Ford 2.3 liter, and there was no fun. Just trying to put the head back together. Had a small problem while running on that. What happened, Burns? What happened on the dyno, man? Give us some deets. Why would there be a problem, Dean, with running nitrous on a Q-Jet? There wouldn't be. You can run nitrous on anything. A 4-barrel on 4 cylinders like dual quads. 4 barrels on 4 cylinders. Heck, they ran a 4-barrel on the Trophy 4-cylinder Pontiac. It was available with a single 4-barrel and a 2-barrel and a 1-barrel, I think. Burns, you got titanium valves and caps. The caps were off by a few hundred thou. That's a huge amount for installed height. Do I know what the part number is on the new Edelbrock carburetor? Let's see. Edelbrock Carb. Look up a 1307. It's a VRS 4150 race carburetor. I think that they do have them in different flow rates too. I think they have 650, 750, and 850 or 950 or something. So they have them in different sizes. So you can look at the different sizes that you want. By the way, there are CFM limited Q-Jets that don't flow 750 CFM. The secondary air door has a stop. Yeah, they have some that do have stops, but you can modify that. Admiral, how can you have a Q-Jet for 6 months and run it on a truck and never flip the air cleaner lid? Ran a 4-barrel on my Slant 6 Barracuda. Yeah, those Clifford manifolds. Cruising fuel economy of a quadrijet is unmatched. It's a bold statement. Only by a Pontiac Tri-Power or port fuel injection. My 82 Z28 had a Q-jet, and it probably had a. Did it have a feedback Q-jet on it on your 82? I know that the L69s did, but I don't think that came about till later, right? I didn't know they had a 165 horse version of one. Where's the famous L69? Overlapping the years from the LG4 from 83 to 86 was a higher compression output, though it maintains 4-barrel carburetor. 83 to 86, okay. E4ME feedback on the 82s, okay. So Oliver's in the house, Mr. L69. Flip the lid, that's what they did on the cars in the 70s. Half of are ready to fall off. The few seals are torn up as well, so I think the caps are fixed and had the extra seals. 450 double pumper does okay cruising, but I can't keep my foot out of it. Yeah, that's really not the carburetor's fault. 1990 Cadillac with an old 307. Yep. Mercury remaining 3.7 4-cylinder could be had with a 4-barrel. Don't know Q-jets. So you had one off a 350, you want to run one on a mild 454. What would you need to be changed? You might not need to change anything. You'd have to have a meter on it to see. Snow barrel, you're late. I ran a flip lid on my 69 455 Olds 98 convertible. There, then you could hear all the glorious noise. You want to convert a standard 750 Quadrajet to E85. The difficulty with that is the one potential downside to a Quadrajet is the size of the fuel bowl is pretty small for performance applications. For E85, it would be even worse because you need more fuel flow, and so that would be problematic. Somebody needs to build a Quadrajet saddle tank to get more fuel or more fuel capacity. I ran a Carter AFB. I ran a thermoquad, I think, on the Dodge also, and I think that worked fairly well. I think that probably was at Dulcich's insistence. Offie made a 4-barrel intake for a Ford 2.8 liter V6. I remember those. A guy that I went to school with had one of the Capris that had that 2.8 liter, and he had a little 4-barrel Holley on it. And I think he ran a little nitrous kit on it too. Flipped the lid on my old TBI truck. It said 100 horsepower. Sure. I've run Q-jets from 350s on 454s just with idle adjustments. That might be all it needs. The nice thing about Brule and always laugh about it, but when we go get carburetors, we call them mechanical mass air meters, because that's kind of what they do. As it draws more air, as more air wants to go through there, it draws more fuel. All right, Getaway, go take care of it, man. My first vehicle was a 77 Silverado with a 350. Flipping the lid made it sound amazing. Yep, it does. I love one of the new VRS cars, but I have a new AVS2 in the box waiting to go on my 355. Richard, have you ever dyno tested a 3.7 Mercury Marine? I haven't. Long ago, I was going to do something with Mahovas because he was thinking about building one, but I haven't run one of those. I just wanted to do it because it uses that Ford big block head. Thermal quad just improved all the Rochester issues, mostly percolation and small fuel bowl. The thermal quad worked good. Monster Energy logo is 666. Put an E85 injector spraying on top of the carburetor. There you go. Then just put an injector spraying on all the cylinders. Then that makes it work even better. Yeah, Dulcich is a thermal quad king. I think that he's of the opinion that that's the best carburetor ever made. I still have a 2.8 that came out of my dad's 79 Capri. I like those little Capris. We used a Carter thermal quad on the 302s and 351s in Australia. Spent years building Q-jets for class racers and street cars, say under 500 horsepower. If you took the time and knew the tricks, they would remain tuned nearly perfectly for a long time. They would. This thing about them falling out of tune is if you let them sit with old fuel in them and the gaskets get bad and stuff, that's really on you. Had the 4-barrel intake on the shelf one time. Yeah, I would like to put together one of those 2.8s. I think that those are cool. Just for me personally, as a nostalgia thing, I really liked his Capri. I didn't appreciate it enough at the time because I had a Camaro, and a Camaro was a V8. It was so much better in every way. And now I look back and I'm like, man, those Capris are really cool looking. He also had an RD 400 and a cool Chevy truck with a 3 on the tree with, I think, if I remember right, I think it was a 283 in it. Camaro, I do want to do. I mean, I am going to do a lid flip test. So I have to get a Quadrajet something, and then the air cleaner, a factory air cleaner, and then we'll do the lid flip. I'm thinking 3D printing a thermal quad body. There you go. Oh, the 2.8 came out and a 351 Cleveland went in. Well, that should sport things up quite a bit. So our poll is at 72%, saying that they have experienced the magic of flipping the air cleaner lid. Built a 400 small block for a guy that put a thermal quad on it. He didn't even know what kind of carburetor it was. Everybody's not a carburetor expert. I've never used a Quadrajet with a single plane intake manifold. You'd almost have to use an adapter, right? Or there's got to be single planes that have the dual patterns on them, I would think. I don't ever remember running one on a single plane. The RD 350s and 400s were definitely wheelie machines. Yep. What are the spacers used for? The carb spacers? They're used for tuning the power output, and in our case, the spacer that's on the thumbnail was used to adapt a 4150 manifold to a Quadrajet. Someone should make a triple Q-jet top for a high ram. Just different filters when you're there, like pod filter, truck air filter, different lengths of intake pipes. The intake pipes on the front of the air cleaner, is that what you're talking about? Like off of the snorkel? We usually run those we made our own after seeing what they did on how cool that they did on the 67 and 68 Z28 stuff with actual cowl induction, the way that they did it and housed the turn from the air cleaner over into the opening in the cowl. And whereas the 69Z28 had the cowl hood on it, so that they just grabbed air from the opening in that part of it. But on the early ones, they didn't have it, and they grabbed it from actually an opening in the back of the firewall. And that's what we did. We just cut a hole in the firewall to that cowl area and ran. I did a cheapy version. We got the accordion flexible stuff from the wrecking yard, where you get all the good performance stuff, and cut a bigger hole in the air cleaner because we didn't want the small one. Cut a bigger hole in the air cleaner, and then just ran that over to another hole in the cowl area. Voila, cowl induction. Flipped the lid on my A3C10 with a Q-Jet and a 305 when I was 16. My old man noticed the sound when I took him for a beer run. You knew what you did. He's got it. I think flow test on a 327 250 horse snorkel type air cleaner only flowed like 300 CFM through the tiny opening. Some of them were really small. Some of the snorkel openings were really tiny. I flipped the lid until someone explained to my 16-year-old mind what cold air meant. That's like having I mean, everybody had these, like even the performance versions of the factory stuff had the open element air cleaners under the hood. We flipped the lid on my buddy's Grand Prix with a 455 in it, and it sucked all the sound deadening material into the air cleaner. It didn't hurt anything because it still had the filter in it, but it's not good. Electric fuel pump with bypass regulator return line back to tank via must E85. Oh, for your carbureted thing that you're talking about? I work at a water jet place now and could cut the triple quadrajet manifold. Well, they already make a blank top, so all you have to do is just cut it out. It would not be hard. You could just take a quadrajet carb spacer, because you'd have to stand these up off of the blank plate because you probably couldn't get the linkage to work. But if you put the 3 of the quadrajet carb spacers on there and then just mark them and cut those openings, it would not be hard. Isn't vacuum secondary superior to mechanical? I don't think one is universally better than the other. It depends on what you're trying to get done. Really had good results with secondary metering rods, hangers, and the secondary dashpot tuning. Yeah. It's not hard to adjust them once you know what the things that they have to adjust and what those things do. It's just like anything. Is it worth converting your carb to blow through, or should I save the money? If you think you can, it's probably going to be cost effective to do it yourself if you have the ability to do that and are confident. I've never done that, actually. 76% are saying that they have done the Q-Jet. Somebody was asking about doing a blow through Q-Jet. I've never done that. Although I would think that if you house it in an enclosure, it should still work. I flipped the lid and the carb froze up. Might have done a lid delete many decades ago, but that was a learning experience. Negative 20. Yeah. Have you tested a 750 and 800? I haven't tested both of those, like in a comparison from one to the other, to see what the difference is. And if you wanted to see a power difference, what you'd have to do is test that on a motor that could benefit from the 800, that was making enough power to benefit from the extra airflow offered by the 800. Otherwise, the 750 would just be enough, and putting an 800 on there wouldn't add any more power. How do you like the new Edelbrock AVS2? I don't know that I've tested the new AVS2. I really like the 1307 carburetor. Do you need a quadrijet to test with? No, I think Westech has quadrijets. So. A 93 to 95 Lincoln Mark 8 throttle body is a twin 57 millimeter or so with progressive linkage. So does that mean one blade opens before the other blade? And does have better low TPS drivability than a regular Cobra Twin 57. That would make sense if you're only opening up one of them. Take a look at what Chevrolet did with the ZR1. They had a really tiny throttle blade for like low speed stuff, and then they basically had 3 blades. So they had the tiny one, and then the twin blades. And so the tiny one would open up while you're driving around, and then the other ones would open up when you need all the airflow. So the smaller the blade is, the better the drivability is going to be. Because we noticed that when we put big throttle bodies, especially on a positive displacement blower, when you put a big throttle body on it, it's super sensitive and twitchy at what would be lower throttle positions, because it just opens up so much airflow at lower throttle positions when it's bigger. B&R, oh, the original Torquer called the Torquer 1 8N Pontiac V8 World has a quadrijet pattern. Okay, I haven't ever seen one, but I take that back. Westech might have. I think Westech might have a single plane Pontiac manifold, and I'll bet it probably is because it's an old one. I bet it might be a Torquer. Second blade doesn't start opening until 50%. That would be good. That would be better for drivability. The thing about a 4.6 is it doesn't have an overabundance of low speed torque. So, but that would be a better option. VW2 with a K-Jet engine. I remember those because I remember doing the throttle body upgrades on those. I think that the Porsche 924, was that one like that also? Did that have a dual blade thing? That's what I thought. I remember my 924 being like that. That was actually a fun car. It was just woefully underpowered. It really needed a turbo on it. We were trying to figure out back in the day how to put the turbo on that 924, how to get the fueling for it. I run both the draw-through turbo 3.8 and then again on a 455 Buick, found that the original draw-through Q-Jet was not great. The nice thing about a draw-through is it's easy to change the carburetor. OE enrichment circuits were not better than pre-smog 750, but I could never quantify the CFM difference between the 750 and 800. S would have done. I had a 924 turbo. Mine was not an S. Mine was a base 924, but it was bright yellow. I think we tried doing some exhaust and air intake stuff and just basic things. The CFM is gained on the primary side of the Q-Jet. Going from the 750 to the 800, is that the size change? The primary, the secondary is the same on those two? I haven't ever compared those two quadrajets. I haven't ever seen them side by side. On the KJ cars, I've gotten the 8-cylinder fuel distributors and used them. Oh, so are you adding extra injectors to do that, Oliver? So the primary side's bigger. So on an 800 CFM quadrajet, then the fuel mileage is going to go away, right? Try tuning a Rochester Varijet carburetor. It's a Q-jet, cut in half. I've only seen photos of those. I don't think I've ever actually worked on one, but thank you for the $5. Okay, I'll buy a beverage or part of a beverage. So Admiral, you're going to port the Emmerich plates. I was looking at the Emmerich stuff when I was deciding a photo to use today, because I was going through a bunch of modular stuff, and I was going through the testing that I did on the early 4.6 4-valve Cobra stuff, the 96 to 98. So I hear that any Pontiac after 1981 isn't a real Pontiac. Didn't they start putting Chevy motors in them? I mean, weren't the Firebirds and stuff all corporate Chevy V8s after that? Way back, we used the Mercedes 560 SEL fuel distributor and added second injector to the manifold and the runners. Okay. The homemade microfueler. Right, Turi. What is the best carb setup for the highest fuel mileage? The carburetor itself is actually not going to deliver you the fuel mileage. A small well, apparently, according to the internet, it's a lawnmower carburetor is what's going to give you 40 or 50 miles per gallon, which I still don't believe. Because a carburetor doesn't do that. You can supply fuel, and you can get fuel, and you can get atomization, and then the intake design and so many other things are going to determine how much fuel you use for how far that you travel. I have both non-electric Varijet and dual jet carburetors. The dual jet carburetor, I think, is what they use. I'm thinking, is that what they used on the where do we have dual jets on? Was it on the Pontiac, on the Trophy 4-cylinder? A 4-variable Venturi carburetor, a really good idea, but I don't think that great of an execution, though. Although I did have a friend of mine run a variable Venturi carburetor on a 280Z with a turbo, and then an AIC. So he had all of the things that shouldn't work, and the thing went fast. California Firebirds had Olds engines beginning in 75. They had the 403s, right? But I thought going into the 80s that they all started using this small block Chevy. Because after wasn't the 301 and the NA and the turbo version, weren't those the last Pontiac ones? Holley made economizer carbs in the early 80s and never sold one to anyone that came back claiming it helped more than 1 mile per gallon. I used a dual jet on my Derby 305, came from a 267 Monte Carlo. My 81 TA was a 5-liter Chevy. I had a 450 Economaster is what they called the one that I used on my Camaro. Old Doug Nash Warrior single plane had an optional quadrojet pad. Cool. Oh, it was magnesium instead of aluminum. Nice. So you throw that into a bonfire, see what happens. Oliver, that's right. Holley made spread bores too. They made those. They tried to make those as direct replacements for the quadrojets, but I don't ever remember doing a test on one. Just looking something up here. Yeah, so they had NA 301s also. They had a 2-barrel and a 4-barrel, 2 different 4-barrel versions, and they had turbo ones also. So I knew that they didn't just have them as turbos. My dad had 79 Ford with a variable carburetor. Yeah, my dad had a Bronco, I think, that had that variable Venturi carburetor. Had a friend had a 427 Ford with a tri-power. That's a good motor if it was a tri-power 427. Just cleaned up my 302 E7 heads and poured them lightly after drilling out for 1/2-inch head studs. Are there any difference between 302 and 351 E7 heads? I don't think that there are. And why did you drill them out for 1/2-inch head studs? Are you putting it on a 351 block? Is that why you're doing it? Because if you're putting it on a 302, don't drill out your block for 1/2-inch head studs on a 302. Oh, it's on a 351. Okay, that makes sense. Alan's in the house. I know people that had 4 barrels that disconnected the secondaries, and I guess they did it because they couldn't keep their foot out of it. They wanted to get better mileage. I'm like, well, just don't step on the gas as much. I know, but you got to. I'm like, well, then you don't get both of those. You don't get to have no self-control and then complain about having no self-control. I just disconnected the secondaries. I'm like, yeah, but you're still using the gas a lot. And that's okay to not have self-control, but you have to accept the consequences of that. So our poll, have you ever run a Q-Jet and flipped the air cleaner lid to hear the glorious sound? 75% saying yes. 2 more minutes. Man, the time goes by fast when we're talking about car stuff. Turbo Century, you don't need to worry about rod ratio. I guarantee you that the manufacturer that built your motor never thought that they should change the rod ratio on it. Your rod ratio was designed to run hundreds of thousands of miles. You shouldn't worry about side loading. Your side loading problem isn't from rod ratio. Overbuilt, what have you seen, and why should we buy lottery tickets? Yes, it is project time. Go get your projects done. Old man, back when the former EPS came out, someone dynoed it and made a little more power than the spreadbore version. The article stated that a square plenum always makes more horsepower. Is that true or false? Well, the word always in there makes me say that that's not universally true. So I don't know why why that plenum, why the plenum shape that's designed to accept the spread bore would have an effect on itself, have an effect on power, other than allowing the carburetor to work better. Richard, any plans to try one of the week-long drag and drive events? I would like to. I've been talking to Jimmy about that, about doing that in the Turbo NSX. That would be kind of fun. Or I'd like to kind of do it in the Omni also. Yeah, I would take and I think a lot of guys do when they're running those things. you would set up, like if you had a 10-second car, if you had a, like, let's say your car could run 1020s, I think you'd set it up to run 1080s or something and run those and try to be consistent with it at every track, and then run that at the last track and then turn it up and run whatever big number that you thought that you could run. I don't think I would take the approach that I try to run as fast as I can starting out at every track. I know guys want to do that and win. And especially if I was doing it my first time, I would want to go and finish. That would be the key. Like when I go to Bonneville, when we're running at Bonneville, I never set the thing up. Like we never set the motor on kill. We didn't even have it set on, basically had it set on our phasers on stun when we took it out there and ran 227. It was we were only running like 15 or 16 pounds of boost. And we had run 29 on the dyno. So we wanted to go out, and that's why I would go out and run the car and come back, and the motor would still be all together and the motor would still be running and everything would be happy, because you go out and run whatever we needed to run, whatever number we needed to run, and then go back up the record and get a record, and that's a win. You would win. And then it's hard for people not to go like all in. And I would approach Drag Week or Sick Week or Rocky Mountain or whatever, any of those. I would approach that the same way. The one that I was talking about, and somebody let me know what the name of it is. There's an event that somebody puts on that they invite YouTube people to. So I might think about doing that. What might be the minimum length on a turbo exhaust pipe? Why would you want to have a minimum length? Usually the exhaust is designed to exit the turbo and then get it away from other stuff, like have it go outside, like a fender dump or something like that. I don't think I would think about minimum. If you wear your pistons from rod ratio, you could just flip them and make more power. That's it. If you have a Turbo Sentra and you're talking about rod ratio, you're looking at the wrong thing. That's not going to fix your problem. You have another problem. And if you do have a problem, you should fix that problem. And I guarantee you that it's not rod ratio. The Omni would be good. But again, the Omni would be fun, but it'd be like a 14-second Omni or whatever, or a 15-second Omni or a 13-second Omni. And the problem with front-wheel drive stuff is I think it's probably going to be easier to break if you really try to get after it. The NSX would be fairly easily a 10-second NSX. And it should go out, and because I think ultimately it's going to be a 9-second NSX, and I think it would pretty handily go out and run. Like what we would do is set it up so that it doesn't have to launch hard, because that's where you're going to break something. So go out and set it up so that it runs 1060s or 1070s or something, but at like 145. so that it has a 2.0 60-foot time, and then just motors on the big end. Yeah, I've seen at Drag Week, they have like 9 and 10-second Omnis, I think, at Drag Week. The outlet pipe with the turbos on Dennis Taylor's 55. I know I've been following Dennis and Alex. Streetcar Takeover. I've been to one of those back with Brian Tooley. Let's see. Probably just run one of the index classes. Yeah, I don't care at all about beating Dennis Taylor's 6-second car. Richard needs a project car with a Vortec Turbo Vortec 5.7 Gen 1. When you do ring gap, you need to do it to the same. We don't do the oil rings. The oil rings we leave alone. The oil rings, you just make sure that we have 15 or 16 thousandths on those. Turbo an old 265, like a 265 Chevy. I would kind of like to build some of those smaller Chevys, the 265 and the 262 and the 267, all the weird ones. And a 221 Ford would also be very cool. Alan, you're driving around, man. That's Reading, that's up in Eureka and stuff. That's all real NorCal. Yeah, I wouldn't want to go there and blow stuff up. I wouldn't be interested in that at all. I just like to go there and make it to all the events and run successful passes at all the events. That would be a win to me, not going like all out and breaking stuff and then having glorious like fixes. I've done that. I know that that's possible, but that's not what I'm about right now. That's the California Drag and Drive event. Oh, okay. Is that the? But what is the one that they invite all the YouTube people to? Did somebody tell me what the name of that is? Because I remember there was a guy here that I tried to send everybody over to because he was trying to make it to the event because he had to get a minimum number of like subscribers and that kind of stuff to actually get to get an invite. I forgot what the name of it. Oh, the No Name Nationals. That's it. That's right. So I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. The No Name Nats. Yeah, Camaro. That's not at all what California is. Although I have something really cool that I want to get in touch with somebody who's like really into the lowrider scene. I have something that I want them to do at a competition that's never been done before, and I want to have it named after me. How would you attach a 5-bolt small block forward to the dyno? Like a 221, you mean? We just have to get the bell housing for it. I'm sure. I know that there's guys that have that. I'm sure of it. I would be surprised if Sanchez doesn't have one. I bet he does. Mark has everything. Usually several of everything. Several. Let's see how are my stocks doing? Oh, look at that! It did exactly what I thought it was going to do. It's so much easier to be really good after it's already done what it's supposed to do. Wow, that went way down, didn't it? So I missed that run because I'm talking to you guys. I missed another run because I'm talking to you guys. Come on. I missed a run down and I missed a run up. But I'm still ahead for today. The puppies are getting heavier. Now they're over 10 pounds. But they did sleep through the night, which is the most important thing. Can we talk stocks? The ones that I'm doing, and I'm just scalping, I'm doing day trading. So I'm doing Tesla, Amazon, AMD, and I also looked at Intel, but I didn't do anything with that today. And we're just looking at volatile stocks, ones that change during the day. The one that go up or go down, we don't care because we can make money both ways. And those have a lot of movement on it. Let's see. So Tesla went from 208.70 to 217.40. So it had big swings. Amazon, not quite as big as that, but from 98.30 to 150, 60. So it had enough movement that there's definitely money. I don't know what the SPY is. I don't know what that is. I'm not all hip. I saw that movie, Dean, Lonesome Dove. Yeah, that's right. Movie puns. It's funny the opinion that people that don't live in California have of California. But it's probably funny the opinion people have of Texas that don't live in Texas or Arkansas or certainly Florida. Yeah, we have growth. We have our watch list set up for top 10 actives in the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. But anymore, I just have those brought up all the time because we know that they have movement in them, and there's enough there for you to make trades on. Yeah, there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of ups and downs. I mean, they had changes of like $2 changes are pretty common, and it, like I said, it had a huge at the beginning where there's a lot of volatility. It dropped and then rose up dramatically. But all I care about is being positive today. Positive mental attitude. So what movie quote is that from, and who made that quote? And did you guys hear Raquel Welch died? Just very sad. Freiberger was right. He posted that she was the hottie of the hotties in the probably 60s and 70s. And I agree. 10,000 BC was the movie that she was in. Her famous like loincloth poster. And then I loved her in she was in a lot of movies that I saw. When she was in the Three Musketeers, she was awesome. It's like people who live in Vegas. There's nobody who lives in Vegas. I lived in Henderson, but we always stayed away from Vegas. My shop was in Vegas, though. I'm from Oklahoma. When I lived in San Jose, I was asked about living in a teepee. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I get that too. Oh, everyone drives Priuses. I'm like, no. There's more people here that drive trucks than in most every other state in the union because there's so many people here. Now, I'll have to say that's one thing as a car guy that I do love about California, and it's also New Mexico and Arizona, and probably Texas too. There's not rust, and so that we don't have to worry about. Although cars by the ocean have to worry about that rust. If you live like on the coast, it's salt water, but inland here in California, we don't have to really worry about rusty. I mean, I remember driving my truck back to Ohio and people looking at it like, "Ooh, where did that come from? Where did that non-rusty vehicle come from?" Yeah, Raquel Welch was gorgeous, and her daughter is too. She was in, I think she was in Cocoon. Everyone lives on the beach and it never rains. Yeah, people flip out when it rains. Gina Lollobrigida. She did. She died a while back too. Yeah. She's another good one. And what's her name? She was in she was in Grumpy Old Men and Grumpier Old Men, I think. Salt from Salt Lakes. Yeah, we don't have to worry too much about that. More, you get the salt from being up in the snow areas. Mother Judson Speed. And what was the one with Burt Reynolds? So Ben, yours will be the last one. I always like QJet for fuel economy, maybe when not on the fun pedal. It does have shortcomings, small fuel bowl, yep, and leaky port plugs. GMO says Taurus only just the secondaries of 75. Yeah, that's all easily fixed though. That's all like the throttle blades. That's pretty easily done. And on that note, I'm done. It's time to go. But I will be back tonight. I've got stuff to do. I got to go see what's going on, and I got to get another video done. Thank you guys all, as always, for showing up. I will see you all tonight.